Psalm 55 is the next prayer of David in this series, Psalms 52 through 60, which address some of David's personal enemies and struggles that resulted in a few curses. In fact, Psalm 55 is one of those imprecatory psalms that's pretty intense. The occasion may have been Absalom's rebellion. So this is when David's own son Absalom turns against him. It's essentially a coup d'etat, and David is driven from the city of Jerusalem, and he's pursued with hopes ultimately of Absalom's hopes that he would kill his own father. So it's a terrible time. I cannot imagine the pain that David is feeling in this moment. And so this is his prayer that comes out of that situation. We can't be for certain that that's the situation. Now, it's not in the superscription, as you can see, but the circumstances would fit pretty well. David's prayer is simply that God would listen, would not hide himself in the midst of this. And so he is expressing his frustrations to God, and here's his complaint. There is the enemy, the oppression of the wicked, trouble, anger. They bear a grudge. The terrors of death have fallen upon me. So David is in fear of his own life. He prays in verse 6 that he might be able to fly away. Oh, if I had the wings like a dove, I would fly away. It's similar to the words that we saw in Psalm 11, verse 1, "In the Lord I take refuge. How can you say to me, flee like a bird to the mountain?" It's a little different. This time David is saying, I really do want to flee. Psalm 11 is kind of like saying, no, I'm not going to be afraid. God is on his throne. In verse 6, it says, no, I really would like to be far away. I'd like to get away, be off in the wilderness to find a shelter from the raging wind and tempest. And you might recall back in Psalm 29, we took a look at a picture painting by Jack Dawson of Peace in the Storm. It was a picture of a dove that was sheltered in the cleft of a rock as the storm raged around it. Well, that's what David prays, and that's often what many of us would pray at certain times, right? I would just like to fly away, be as far away as I can, and be at rest. Here's his request in verse 9. It's the first curse of this psalm. Destroy, O Lord, divide their tongues, for I see violence and strife in the city. So it is words, once again, that are causing David great pain. And this reference to the city is where we get the idea that this is a time of Absalom's rebellion, when the whole nation was in turmoil. This was essentially something of a civil war that was taking place here. Anytime a king is deposed and kicked out, there are going to be people that take sides, and so that could be what David is referring to here. He says, day and night they go around on its walls, trouble, iniquity are within it, ruin, oppression, fraud. Do not depart from this marketplace. So it describes a corrupt and wicked place, just the decay of society. So this could be what is taking place during the time of Absalom's rebellion. And here he gets specific with the pain. It's not an enemy who taunts me, for I could handle that. It's not an adversary. I could hide from him. But it's you, a man, my equal, my companion, my familiar friend. We used to take counsel together, and within God's house we walked in the throng. And so this is where we get the idea that this is either his son Absalom, who certainly would have worshipped with David and been a companion to him, or more possibly maybe Ahithophel, one of David's advisors, a friend, companion, counsel. All those suggest those terms. Of course, we can't read this without seeing it through the lens of Christ and Judas being Jesus' companion, sitting at his left hand, even in the hours before he was betrayed. So certainly Jesus could pray certain aspects of this psalm. Verse 15 is another curse. Let death steal over them. Let them go down to Sheol, the place of the dead, alive, for evil is their dwelling place and in their heart. So it's a prayer for quick and sudden death. But David in confidence replies, but I call to God, and the Lord will save me, evening and morning and at noon. And note the order there. That's the Jewish thinking. The day begins in the evening and concludes with the day. It begins with rest and ends with activity. And so 3 times David prays and utters his complaint. He redeems my soul in safety from the battle that I wage, for many are arrayed against me. God will give ear and humble them, he who is enthroned from of old, because they do not change and do not fear God. What is it that we've observed in Psalms 52, 53, 54? We observe men who do not fear God. David returns to the complaint again in verse 20. My companion stretched out his hand against his friends and violated his covenant. Again, his words are highlighted here. His speech is as smooth as butter, yet war was in his heart. His words were softer than oil, yet they were drawn swords. It is indeed words that can be some of the most painful things, especially when they come to us from the mouths of friends. But then we have one of the most beautiful promises in all the Psalms, and indeed this is quoted in the New Testament, 1 Peter 5:6. Cast your burden on the Lord, for he will sustain you. He will never permit the righteous to be moved. You, O God, will cast them down into the pit of destruction. Men of blood and treachery shall not live out half their days. So here we have our third curse in this psalm, and it is a curse that David's enemies would die an untimely death, not live out half their days. They would die young. And in contrast to them, David says, but I trust in you. In his commentary, Krieghauser notes that this psalm is the central psalm to Psalms 52 through 60, that it turns on this single phrase, but I trust in you. And indeed, that's how we need to respond to betrayal, to the wounds that might even come from a friend. We need to respond by simply trusting in God, in his justice and his goodness.